Okay, hello everybody. So today I want to talk about, well, it's one thing really, it's the war on food, but as we know, the Netherlands is central to that at the moment, and that's why I have the chart of the Netherlands up there. So I'm first going to talk in general about things that are going on in terms of the war on food and how this plays into depopulation and many agendas. Then we will have a little look at the chart of Holland, and I'll do that second, just for the people who aren't really that interested in astrology. You won't have to hang on until the end. I must first emphasize that at the beginning of the year, I did a vlog about Saturn in Aquarius and how many times in history Saturn in Aquarius has been associated with famine. And right now, Saturn is in Aquarius, and we know that there is this massive attack on the food supply chain. I looked up, and during the Holodomor, Saturn was also in Aquarius. So this is very relevant. So, okay, just got to... Should have had my other page up. I've got some notes. Okay, let's see what we've got here before I start the chart for Holland, because I just want to do a recap of everything that's going on around the world just to frame this. So, amazingly, the Netherlands is the biggest meat exporter in the EU. So they are very productive farmers. They use very intensive, highly technological techniques. They are very competent, so they produce a lot. In fact, the Netherlands is the second biggest exporter of food in the world, second to the United States, which, bearing in mind it's a tiny country, mainly reclaimed from the sea. It's quite amazing, isn't it? I mean, it's half the size of Indiana, I think, the Netherlands. So they are wonderful, very productive, skilled, talented farmers. The agricultural industry is worth 94 billion a year in Holland. There are 54,000 agricultural businesses. And Rutte, who is a World Economic Forum young global leader, that's their wonderful prime minister, he wants half of all farms closed, finished, end of. It's quite staggering to contemplate that. He also wants some farms will have to reduce their cattle by 95%. Other farm overall, cattle must be reduced by 40%, right? So there's a massive attack on meat. If they're the leading meat producer in the whole of the EU, you can see here the big attack on beef coming. What does that also mean for leather goods, handbags, and everything like that? Interesting, because we think of it only in terms of food, because that's more immediate and more serious. But what about other industries? Because a lot is made of the cow, right? The gelatin, everything, right? Okay. So there are generations of farms which are now being destroyed. I mean, farming is in the family in Holland, right? But of course, according to Rutte, who's following the World Economic Forum script, cattle produce emissions, and there's also nitrogen in the soil, which is why they want to cut back on all the farming, which includes flowers, because a huge amount of tulips from Amsterdam, of course, come from Holland. So, but in fact, Holland farmers have been the best in the world at reducing their emissions and becoming more ecological. So to attack them when their nitrogen emissions are one of the lowest in Europe is just crazy. And remember, there are other industries like aviation, transport. We could name hundreds of them that are emitting far, far more than cows, farming, nitrogen, etc. They're just trying to put these farmers totally out of business. And I will mention this again because someone asked me when I did a vlog a couple of weeks ago which was called The New City State, and it's about this plan to create a super state out of Belgium, Holland, and parts of Germany like Cologne and Dusseldorf. They want to create a super state that will be the end of the Belt and Road, and we'll have at the heart of it Rotterdam, which is already Chinese owned. So someone said to me, is this true? Yes, it is. It's an actual plan. And Rutte actually said that what they need, a lot of the farmland the farmland that's going to be reclaimed from the farmers, is low-cost housing for migrants. So they're creating the super city smart state out of those two countries plus a bit of Germany, which is a frightening prospect. What on earth will it be like turning that wonderful agriculturally rich area, because the soil is particularly rich in the Netherlands, what it'll be like turning that into some like mass ghetto, really, if it's just low-cost housing, people piled on top of each other like this dreadful, disgusting sideways skyscraper that they're doing in Saudi Arabia, which is nothing more than a high-tech prison. Awful. Now, this war on farmers is economic and national suicide. But remember what I said a long time ago? Please do revisit my vlog on Agenda 2030, because I did that in 2017 and I foretold a lot of this because it was already on the cards. They always attack, and the Bolsheviks knew that, you attack the farmers. because the farmers are your problem. If you want an authoritarian dictatorship, you want rid of farmers because they are too self-sufficient, they tend to be nationalistic, they tend to be conservative, they are your enemy. So that's why there's such an attack on farming, and because it gives people a certain degree of independence, and that's why the state needs control of food. The farm, they want control of energy, they want control of food, gives them more power. So the Soviets already knew that. Now, all these World Economic Forum guidelines about reducing farming. Let's just think about the Georgia Guidestones briefly, because they talk about the aim to reduce population to about 500 million. There was this attack on them, they exploded, whatever happens. But very soon after, they were demolished. I think the very same day they demolished them and they cleared the site. Well, where was the investigation? They obviously weren't too worried about looking for forensic evidence and trying to find out who blew them up, were they? And you've heard nothing about the rogue Trump supporter and the right-wing lunatic and the Nazi that blew them up, have you? You've heard nothing. So obviously they know it must have been them that blew them up. That's why they're not looking for the suspect. That's why they took away all the evidence. So California is having one of the worst droughts, and because of the water shortages, they're also limiting irrigation to the farms. So once with irrigation limited, we've got a further cutback in the amount of produce coming out of California. Most of the farmland west of the Mississippi is totally in water crisis. Just to recap, those 3,000 cattle that died in Kansas, supposedly of heat, or were they thirsty? Well, to me, they looked like very well-nourished stiffs. They were just 3,000 stiffs. Surely if there was some sort of crisis with the weather, or with them dying of thirst, they would have died in stages. But it seems there was more like a bolt of lightning, some sort of gassing of them, that they died all at once. So that to me seemed like it was not just a natural occurrence. It was something that was planned, and it was done to a huge herd all at once. They're killing millions of chickens across the United States, which is sending chicken and egg prices up. It's all to do with, there's a bird flu outbreak, and we're going to use this PCR test, and whoops, it's come up positive, so sorry, we're going to have to exterminate all your chickens. You see how this works. Now, the EU is limiting state aid for farmers, so it's another attack by the EU on farming. Even in Switzerland, they used to think that being food independent was absolutely vital to them being neutral as a country, but even they're going back on that now. We have countries like Argentina and Paraguay, big corn producers and also wheat producers that are suffering a lot of drought, major droughts. And what with the sanctions on Ukraine and the problems there's a bottleneck in shipping worldwide, meaning that they're not getting their fertilizer that they need in Argentina as well, which is further impairing farming that can take place. We have China have lots of ruined wheat crops because they had a very wet winter season and they were able to plant too late going into spring, so there's a problem there. Plus Shanghai, the most major port in the world, is being totally shut down because of COVID lockdown, so we haven't got anything moving in and out of Shanghai, which is further cutting the supply chain, including the food supply chain. We have 22 African countries who get fertilizer from Russia and Ukraine. That's interrupted because of the sanctions. 35 African countries get their food mainly from Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, again interrupted because of this war and sanctions. So we can see how many shortages. Then you've got countries like Rhodesia, former Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, which were the breadbasket of Africa. There were sort of 5,500 highly productive commercial farms in Zimbabwe, producing far more produce than the country needed. But, of course, we had to have the Marxist government, ZANU-PF, etc. They had this land reform policy. Of course, the land was taken away from the productive farmers, or whatever they did with it. Gosh, it was a mess, all you can say. A Marxist hot mess, as usual. And what happened? Now we have a country with 95% of are unemployed. Half of Zimbabwe now live out the country. Half of Zimbabweans live out the country. And instead of being a net food producer for the whole of Southern Africa and beyond, they are now have to have aid sent to them. So you see again an attack. And I have spoken before about the South African farmers, the attack because of expropriation without compensation, farms being taken away, obviously, the terrorism against farmers with the farm murders. We've gone from 70,000 highly productive farms in South Africa, a net exporter of food, to only 30,000 farms, much lower productivity. And South Africa now has to import food because the population's exploded while farm productivity is collapsed. So you can see in so many countries how this war on food is working. And one more story about the US railroads. So leading up to spring, the US government put pressure on CF Industries. Now, CF Industries in Dearborn, Illinois, are a producer of nitrogen fertilizer and also vital components for diesel. So diesel for trucks, diesel for farm equipment, so and diesel additives, right? And adjuvants, or whatever they call them. So Union Pacific, which is one of the 4 companies that own the railways, said they were going to reduce the amount of private cars available on the railways. This means that CF Industries are suffering this reduction in the ability to transport things. So obviously in Michigan, it's a port, it comes in to Dearborn. They want to transport all the stuff via the railroads to the farms all over, Indiana, Tennessee, Kansas, California, Oregon, Nebraska, and they can't get the fertilizer out and they can't get the crops back from the farm. So you can see these ludicrous, but as part of the war on food, highly pointed policies from the White House are again snarling up the working of farms, making them less productive, making it impossible for them to do business. So as I say, the CF Industries is the largest producer of fertilizer and diesel additives, which are needed for the farm equipment in America, and they're being hamstrung because of these restrictions from Union Pacific on the railroads. It's crazy. It's a delay of fertilizer for spring, already jeopardized harvests going into the summer and autumn areas. So it's also more pressure on fertilizer delivery. It's crazy. It's all reducing food availability across the world, And also now we've got biofuels accounting for 40% of the cornfields, and those biofuels won't be eaten. It's going for fuel. So again, it's attack on the amount of land available for soil. So you can I just wanted to go through that because it just says so nicely, so horribly, I suppose, what's going on with this fertilizer thing. Let's look at the Netherlands chart. Okay, very interested that they have Sun in Scorpio conjunct midheaven, because they are also like a monarchy and they were a world power, colonial power, and it's quite common for them to have Sun conjunct the midheaven. Very interested at Pluto in Capricorn on the AC. Capricorn is all about engineering and Pluto about grand engineering projects, and that says to me the dikes, the way so much land was reclaimed from the sea. It shows what a huge technological advancements have helped that country become so successful in terms of agriculture, and what with the IC in Taurus, and of course the rising in Capricorn, it's very much agrarian agriculture productiveness, and also they are so fastidious and precise, the Dutch, super clean, super efficient, super tough and strong as well. So if this fight is in the hands of the Dutch to lead us, that's great, isn't it? So there's a lot of determination, strength of character, resilience and endurance going on with the Dutch. Jupiter here just in 29 degrees of Pisces, a seafaring nation. Of course, they went out, Dutch East India Company, and part of founding the whole farming community in South Africa, which became the Afrikaans or speaking population. I know they're a bit mixed with French Huguenots as well, but you see that they've spread the tradition of farming even to countries like South Africa. So we see here the colonial power, that it's a monarchy, rich in agriculture. Also the mineral wealth, because BP Shell mining is also quite important, hence Pluto rising. Moon in Aquarius, well, they're very progressive. They've got their, their like cannabis cookies and cannabis shops, and they were the leaders in terms of sexual liberation and gay rights and that sort of thing. So it's a very liberal thinking country. Quite low proportion of Christians there. They're not particularly religious, which you'd expect with Moon in Aquarius. It's kind of an open-minded, very progressive society, right? So I think we've got a few key things there. But what's interesting is, look at now, Pluto is, when it moves into Aquarius, which is next year, Pluto is in Aquarius next year, okay, it does go back into Capricorn, but it's in Aquarius. It will be conjuncting Mars and Moon in their first house, both in Aquarius. Mars, which is ruling here the third house, transport, right? And Moon, which is associated with agriculture, patriotism, nationalism, and the spirit of the country, and which also rules their house of open enemies, is also affected. So because these planets are in the first house and Pluto is moving past there, we expect some major changes. Bearing in mind, Pluto already passed this point here, the ascendant Pluto. But I think this will be slightly more significant, the Mars moon, because that does show a spirit of uprising, doesn't it? That shows the people getting angry, rising up, realizing what is happening, wanting to take their country back. And being in the first house, it's all about borders, national identity. So it does show a rising up of the Dutch and wanting to seize back power in terms of this whole crisis. And also we have Uranus here, which is on the IC in Taurus at 15 degrees of Taurus. Uranus will be back around there for the end of this year and next year, also showing a restlessness and a rise of right-wing style conservative politics, which is the style of politics from which any resistance is going to come, let's be honest. So that's pretty encouraging for Holland. So we see huge pressure from enemies, because Moon represents the house of open enemies. So we see that things are really going to come to a head in Holland. People rising up, people getting in the know. The fact that the Dutch are strong, resilient, determined, gutsy and resourceful. Remember, huge amount of resourcefulness in the Dutch. If anyone can think their way strategically out of this, it's going to be them. So I do think that the farmers and the Dutch are going to put up a strong fight against this. I think they're going to realize what's happening, and there's going to be some excellent moves to arrest what's going on.